The crack was small, not even dramatic. A thin white line that looked like someone had dragged a fingernail across the glass and kept going. Miles Booker noticed it only when the classroom lights shifted and the screen caught a glare. He tilted the district iPad, blinked, tilted it again, and felt that instant, sour drop in his stomach. The kind that arrives before you can explain what you did wrong. The kind that does not care whether you actually did anything. He had not thrown it. He had not slammed it. He had not been careless. If anything, he treated that device like it was a borrowed plate in someone else's house. Careful steps, careful hands, careful everything. His grandmother had drilled that into him without ever making a speech about it. It was just how their life worked. Keep things clean. Keep things calm. Keep your name out of trouble. Especially in a district where trouble seemed to find certain kids more quickly than others. That morning was normal until it was not. The iPad had been issued at the start of the year with an asset sticker and a case that did not quite fit right, the plastic edges slightly bent, the corners loose. The case had already been used, scuffed from some other kid's year, and the screen protector was missing. The teacher had said the district was still waiting on supplies, that replacements were on the way, that everyone should be careful. Miles had been careful. He used the iPad for math drills, reading checks, and the little timed quizzes that made his heart race in a way he hated. He kept it in his backpack, in a padded sleeve his grandmother bought from a discount store. The kind of purchase that meant she gave up something else without mentioning it. He never left it on the floor. He never put it on the edge of a desk. He never walked around holding it like a tray. He did not even lend it to friends. He was the kid teachers described with tired admiration. Polite, quiet, bright. A boy who did his work and tried not to take up too much space. The crack still appeared. He raised his hand and asked to go see the media specialist, because that was the rule. Device issues went through the media center. The teacher nodded in that distracted way adults do when they assume a child's problem is small and manageable. In the media center, the specialist took the iPad with a practiced grip, turned it under the overhead light, and made a face that hardened in stages. She flipped the device over, checked the asset tag, then glanced at Miles as if she was suddenly unsure what kind of child stood in front of her. She asked for his name, his teacher, his grade, and whether he had been rough with it. He answered in a steady voice, because he was used to questions that pretended to be neutral while waiting for you to slip. She typed. She clicked through screens. She sighed. She said the damage would have to be reported. She said there would be a form. She said the school would follow the process. Miles nodded like a grown person accepting paperwork. Then she sent him to the office. The front office was the building's nerve center, fluorescent and busy, full of ringing phones and clipped voices. 2 secretaries sat behind a counter with a window slot that looked like it belonged in a place that did not trust the people outside it. A sign listed rules about tardies and visitors and identification. Everything felt like it had been designed to keep someone from arguing. Miles waited. The assistant principal came out, a tall white man with a calm smile that did not reach his eyes. He asked Miles to come into his office and close the door. The office was neat in a way that felt rehearsed. Framed certificates, a school logo, a small flag, a stack of handbooks. The assistant principal sat down, folded his hands, and began with that careful adult tone that sounds like patience, but is actually control. He asked Miles again what happened. Miles explained again, slower this time, because he could tell the adult wanted him to say something different. The assistant principal asked whether Miles had dropped it. Miles said he did not. The assistant principal asked whether anyone else had touched it. Miles said he didn't let anyone use it. The assistant principal leaned back slightly, as if that answer itself was suspicious. Then the assistant principal said the district considered cracked screens to be damage to district property. Miles already knew that. Every student knew it. They said it over and over in announcements and handbooks, as if repeating it turned children into insurance policies. The assistant principal said the policy required a referral. That word landed wrong. Referral sounded like a counselor. Referral sounded like help, not like what came next. The assistant principal told Miles to stand up and follow him down the hall. They walked past classrooms and bulletin boards and the art display of paper leaves and motivational slogans. Miles tried to breathe normally because he could feel that hot tightness building in his chest. His hands started to sweat. His face felt too warm. They stopped at a door with a small sign, "Police Office." Miles had seen the school resource officer before. Everyone had. A uniformed presence in the hallway, a radio on the belt, a car in the parking lot. The officer was usually friendly in the shallow way adults are friendly to kids they do not actually know. High fives, jokes, reminders to stay in line. He was also the person students avoided when they did not have to pass. The assistant principal knocked once and opened the door without waiting. The officer looked up from a desk. Miles stepped inside. The assistant principal explained briefly that the district iPad assigned to Miles had a cracked screen and the device had been handled improperly. That last part was not what Miles had said, not even close. But it was how adults wrote stories when they wanted a single line to justify what they were about to do. Miles felt himself go still. The officer asked Miles to sit. The chair faced the desk. Miles sat. The officer spoke in a voice meant to sound casual. He asked Miles if he understood that damaging district property could be considered a criminal matter. He asked whether Miles wanted to tell the truth now so it could go easier. He asked whether Miles understood that lying made things worse. Miles stared at the officer's hands and tried to keep his breathing quiet. He could feel how the room wanted something from him. A confession, a neat narrative, a conclusion that would justify the school's reaction. He said again that he did not crack it. He said it was fine when he logged in earlier. He said he noticed it during class. He said he did not know how it happened. The officer's face shifted slightly, almost impatient. The assistant principal stayed standing near the door, arms folded like a bouncer. Then the officer asked for Miles's grandmother's phone number. That was when Miles's throat tightened. His grandmother, Laverne Booker, had been raising him since he was little. His mother came and went, like bad weather. His father was more rumor than person. Laverne had kept the house together with careful routines and a job that hurt her knees. She treated school like a contract. She signed papers, attended meetings, smiled at teachers, stayed polite. She believed in doing things the correct way because the world did not forgive black families for messiness. When the phone rang, she was at work. The call didn't come from the school's main office line. It came from the police office. Laverne picked up and heard an unfamiliar voice introduce himself as the school resource officer. The officer told her her grandson was in the police office regarding damaged district property. The officer said there may be a report. The officer said they needed to discuss restitution. The officer asked her to come to the school. Laverne did not shout. She did not demand. She did not let her voice break. She asked where Miles was. The officer said he was safe. She asked why a cracked screen required police. The officer said it was district procedure. She asked whether the device had been inspected when it was assigned. The officer did not answer that question in any meaningful way. She told them she was coming. On the drive to the school, Laverne felt something she hated, something old. Not fear exactly, more like a cold calculation. The sense that this was not just about a screen. It was about who they thought her grandson was allowed to be. The district might call it procedure, but procedure had never been evenly applied. Procedure could be a mask. She arrived at the front office and was directed down the hall. When she reached the police office door, she saw the assistant principal standing outside now, talking to someone. He glanced at her and gave a polite smile that looked practiced. Laverne entered the police office and saw her grandson sitting straight-backed in a chair like he was trying to become invisible. His eyes were fixed forward, wide and controlled. He looked like a child forced to act like an adult before he was ready. Laverne walked to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Not gentle, not rough, just steady. The small touch that says, "You're not alone. Not in here." She asked to see the device. The officer pulled it from a drawer and held it up. The crack looked thin, but clear. Laverne asked whether they had the intake checklist, the form that showed the condition of the device when issued. The officer looked to the assistant principal, and the assistant principal said that was handled by the media center. Laverne asked why her grandson was in a police office without her present. The officer said he had only asked a few questions. The assistant principal said this was normal. Laverne said it did not feel normal. The officer then shifted to money. He said the district typically assessed a fee for screen damage. He said if families could not pay, the district had other options. He said the report could still be filed. Laverne heard the shape of it: pay or suffer. Miles looked at her, and she could see how carefully he was holding himself together. A boy trying not to cry because he believed tears would be used against him. Laverne felt anger rise, hot and thick, and she had to swallow it down to keep her voice clear. She asked for the written policy. The assistant principal said the handbook covered it. She asked for the specific section and the current district guidance memo, because districts often updated procedures without updating the handbook. She had learned that from years of dealing with housing offices and billing departments and human resources. The assistant principal's smile tightened. He said they would send it. Laverne asked whether the school had reviewed hallway cameras or classroom cameras. The assistant principal said the classroom did not have cameras. Laverne asked whether the district tracked device repair rates and known defects. She asked whether the model had issues. She asked whether the case was new or reused. She asked whether there were delays in protective screen supplies. The officer's face went blank. The assistant principal said those questions were outside the scope of the meeting. Laverne said the scope was her grandson being treated like a criminal over a piece of fragile glass. She signed nothing. She asked for a copy of any report that had been started. They said there was not one yet. She asked for the names of everyone involved. They gave her names, reluctantly. She took Miles home, and in the car, he finally let his shoulders sag. He did not cry, but his voice shook when he asked whether he was going to be arrested. Laverne told him no. Then she realized she could not actually guarantee that. She corrected herself and said she would not let it happen without a fight. She told him to keep his routine, do his homework, stay respectful, and say nothing about the meeting at school unless she was present. That night, she pulled out the student handbook and read it like a contract. She found the section on technology and devices, the section on discipline, the section on law enforcement. She saw vague language about vandalism and theft. She saw a line about referrals. She saw no clear requirement to send a child to a police office for a cracked screen. She wrote notes on scrap paper. The next morning, she emailed the principal, the assistant principal, and the district technology coordinator. She requested the device intake form, the repair assessment, the policy that triggered law enforcement involvement, and the evidence supporting any allegation of wrongdoing by Miles. She requested a copy of the incident report, if one existed. She requested a meeting with the district office. She expected slow responses. She did not expect silence. Days passed. Miles returned to class with a loaner device and a new tension in his posture. He kept his head down. He stopped raising his hand as much. He stopped eating as freely at lunch. When the resource officer walked through the hallway, Miles looked away. Laverne kept emailing. Eventually, the assistant principal responded with a short message that referenced district policy and said families were responsible for damage. No attachments, no intake form, no evidence. Then came a letter sent home in Miles's backpack. It stated that the district had determined Miles caused damage to district property and owed a fee. It stated that failure to pay could result in further disciplinary action. The letter was printed, official, cold. It used words like determined and responsible as if a conclusion had been reached in a fair process. Laverne read it twice, then 3 times, feeling that familiar urge to scream that she refused to indulge. Instead, she did what she always did when systems tried to corner her. She documented. She scanned the letter. She photographed the iPad from multiple angles. She wrote down dates, times, names, and summaries of every interaction. She asked Miles to describe his day from the moment he took the iPad out of his backpack. She asked him who sat near him, who had touched his desk, when the teacher walked around the room, when the class transitioned. She then contacted the district office and asked about their grievance process. A receptionist told her to submit a request in writing, so she did. She asked for a hearing. Not a school meeting, not a hallway conversation, but an actual hearing where the district would have to explain itself on record. The district responded faster than she expected. They scheduled a technology responsibility hearing at the administrative building in a conference room used for such matters. It was framed as a chance for Laverne to appeal the fee. It did not mention the police office at all, as if that part never happened. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Laverne started to see patterns. She spoke carefully with other parents at pickup. Not gossip, not drama. Questions. Had anyone else been charged for cracked screens? Had anyone else been sent to the resource officer? Some parents were hesitant to talk. Others spoke in quick, angry bursts, as if they had been waiting. A white parent mentioned a cracked screen that had been waived because the device had been considered defective. Another parent said their child's screen cracked and they were simply given a repair ticket. No officer, no threat. A black parent, a tired father with a fluorescent work vest, said his nephew had been questioned by the resource officer over a missing charger. Laverne felt her stomach go tight again. This was not random. A friend suggested she file a public records request. Laverne had never filed one before, but she could read forms. She could fill in blanks. She could ask for categories. She could be specific without getting lost. She submitted a request to the district for all emails and internal communications over a certain time period that referenced device damage, cracked screens, referrals to law enforcement, restitution, and school resource officer involvement. She requested any guidance memos sent to principals regarding technology damage. She requested any data showing referrals by school and by demographic category, if such data existed. The district acknowledged the request and gave a timeline. It was not fast. It was not friendly. It was legal. While waiting, Laverne prepared for the hearing with what she already had. She printed the handbook sections. She highlighted vague phrases. She wrote questions in the margins. She made a folder, thick and organized, because she wanted the room to see that she was not improvising. The day of the hearing, Miles wore a collared shirt, not because anyone told him to, but because he wanted to look like the kind of boy adults believed. Laverne hated that he felt he needed that costume. The administrative building smelled like carpet and bureaucracy. They were escorted to a conference room with a long table. At the far end sat a district administrator from technology services, a school administrator from Miles's building, and a person from student services who looked like she was there to say the district cared. On the table lay a file with Miles's name. Laverne sat down and placed her own folder in front of her, the manila edges crisp. The administrator began by stating that the purpose of the hearing was to determine responsibility for device damage and assign appropriate restitution. He spoke calmly, like a banker. The assistant principal stated that Miles had brought a device with a cracked screen and could not provide an explanation. He said Miles had been referred according to procedure. Laverne listened without interrupting. Then she asked for the intake form. They said they did not have it in the room. Laverne asked how they could determine responsibility without knowing the condition of the device when issued. The technology administrator said the devices were inspected before distribution. Laverne asked to see the record of that inspection. They said it was handled by the school. Laverne asked why the school did not bring it. The assistant principal's face tightened. Laverne asked whether the iPad had any prior repair history. The technology administrator said they would need to check. Laverne asked whether the model had known screen fragility issues. The technology administrator said all devices could break. Laverne asked again why her grandson was taken to a police office. The room went quiet in a way that felt rehearsed, not surprise, more like discomfort. The assistant principal said the resource officer's office was used for private conversations and safety. Laverne asked what safety concern existed. A boy with a cracked screen, a boy with no history of discipline, a boy who had never been suspended. They gave general answers about policy and consistency. Laverne then asked a question that made the student services representative shift in her chair. She asked whether the district tracked referrals to law enforcement for device damage and whether those referrals were more frequent for Black students. The technology administrator said the hearing was not about demographics. Laverne said the hearing was about why her grandson was treated like a criminal over fragile glass, and demographics were part of that reality, whether the district liked it or not. The technology administrator tried to steer back to the fee. He referenced a standard rate for screen repairs and suggested the family could request a payment plan. Laverne said she would not pay for something they could not prove Miles caused. The assistant principal said there was no other explanation. Laverne said there were many other explanations, including defective equipment, inadequate cases, missing screen protectors, careless handling by staff, and normal wear from the device being passed around for years. She asked whether the classroom teacher ever collected iPads in a stack. She asked whether students were required to carry them during transitions. She asked whether the school had ever replaced cases or screen protectors for Miles's class. The assistant principal didn't answer directly. The hearing ended with the district saying they would review and notify her of the decision. Laverne walked out with Miles and felt the weight of it. They were treating the fee as inevitable, and they were treating the police office visit as an awkward detail that could be ignored. On the drive home, Miles asked whether the district could really make him go to court. Laverne told him the district could try a lot of things. She did not want to scare him. She also refused to lie. She told him they were not finished. Then, days later, the public records response began to arrive. It came in pieces: a secure link, then a file dump, messages with attachments, chains, internal memos. Laverne sat at her kitchen table at night and opened the files slowly, like someone handling evidence. At first, it looked like typical district communication. Technology staff complaining about broken devices, principals asking for replacements, budgets, delays. Then she found a thread that made her hands go cold. An email chain between district administrators, technology services, and principals. It discussed the rising cost of device repairs and the increase in damage claims. It included language about accountability. It referenced the need to set an example. It outlined a recommendation that schools involve the resource officer for certain categories of damage to create deterrence. It suggested documenting incidents in a way that supported restitution demands. It warned administrators to maintain consistency in language to avoid families arguing about interpretation. It also mentioned in a separate thread that a shipment of protective cases had been delayed for months and that many devices were deployed without adequate protection. It mentioned that certain older iPad batches had recurring screen issues. It referenced a vendor warranty discussion that had stalled. It included a note about district insurance requiring proof of negligence to recoup costs, and that referrals to law enforcement created documentation that made reimbursement more likely. The words were not dramatic. They did not need to be. They were the quiet machinery of an institution deciding how to move costs onto families and how to use the presence of police to apply pressure. Laverne kept reading. There were messages between principals and the district office about handling families who refused to pay. There were suggestions about warning letters. There were references to escalation. There was also something else, buried in a chain that nearly looked like routine. A note from a district administrator acknowledging that referrals were not being applied evenly, that some schools were using the resource officer more often for device damage, and that the optics could become an issue if a complaint reached the board. Optics. Not justice. Not fairness. Optics. Laverne printed the most relevant emails and placed them in her folder like bricks. She requested a second hearing. Not the narrow technology fee meeting, but a student discipline hearing, because the original incident involved police, implied criminality, and had impacted her grandson's record and school experience. She requested that the district address the referral itself, not just the repair cost. The district responded with reluctance, then scheduled a hearing with a broader panel. This time it included a hearing officer, someone from legal counsel, and a representative from Equity Services. Miles went quiet when he heard the word legal. On the day of the hearing, Laverne arrived with her folder and a simple expectation. She expected them to talk around the issue again. She expected them to act confused. She expected them to politely dismiss her concerns. She did not expect the email trail to change the temperature of the room. The hearing room was larger, with a long table and chairs arranged like a small courtroom. A district attorney sat to one side, calm and unreadable. The assistant principal sat across from Laverne with his hands folded. The resource officer was present, uniform crisp. Laverne began by stating the facts in order. The crack discovered during class, the immediate reporting, the referral to the office, the escort to the police office, the questioning, the threat of a report, the restitution letter, the lack of evidence, the refusal to provide intake documentation. She then slid a printed packet across the table, pages clipped. The hearing officer glanced down, then looked up. The district attorney asked what the packet contained. Laverne said it contained internal district emails provided in response to a public records request. The room shifted. Small movements. A throat cleared. A pen paused. The hearing officer asked the district attorney to review. The district attorney flipped through the pages, and the calm mask faltered just slightly. Not panic, more like annoyance at being caught in the open. The hearing officer asked the district to explain why the resource officer was involved. The assistant principal began to describe safety and procedure. Then Laverne directed the hearing officer to a specific email in the packet. One that outlined the recommendation to involve the resource officer for device damage as a deterrent and documentation strategy. The hearing officer read silently. The Equity Services representative leaned forward. The district attorney tried to reframe it as a general discussion that did not dictate actual school action. Laverne directed them to another email that followed up with principles and encouraged consistent language in incident reports to support restitution. She directed them to the chain discussing missing protective cases and known device fragility. She did not have to raise her voice. The paper did it for her. The hearing officer asked the technology administrator, present this time, whether the district had deployed devices without proper protection. The administrator admitted there had been supply delays. The hearing officer asked whether the device issued to Miles had a new case and screen protector. The technology administrator could not confirm. The hearing officer asked whether the district could provide intake documentation proving the device was undamaged when issued. The district could not produce it in the room. The hearing officer asked whether the district had considered device defects and supply failures when sending children to a police office. The district attorney began to argue about the purpose of the hearing and the limits of relevance. The hearing officer shut that down quickly. The officer asked the resource officer to explain what occurred in the police office. The resource officer described a conversation, a routine check, a discussion about responsibility, a process. He avoided describing the pressure. He avoided describing the power imbalance. He avoided describing the implicit threat that a child's denial could become a legal problem. The hearing officer asked whether the resource officer would have handled the same situation with any student. The resource officer said he treated all students fairly. The hearing officer asked whether the district tracked how often students were brought to the police office for device damage. The district attorney said that data was not readily available. Laverne felt something shift inside her, a quiet satisfaction that did not feel like joy. It felt like relief mixed with grief. Relief that the paper was speaking. Grief that it had taken this much effort to force basic fairness. The hearing officer then asked a question that made the assistant principal's posture tighten. He asked whether a formal incident report had described Miles as having handled the device improperly, despite Miles consistently denying wrongdoing. The assistant principal said the report reflected the situation. The hearing officer asked whether that language had been influenced by district guidance, encouraging consistent wording to support restitution. The assistant principal hesitated, then said he followed procedure. The hearing officer sat back and reviewed the packet again, pages turning slowly. In that pause, Miles looked at his grandmother. She could see his eyes searching for a sign that the room believed him. Not sympathy, not pity, belief. Laverne held his gaze and gave him the smallest nod. The hearing officer then stated that the district had failed to meet its burden to show that Miles caused the damage. He stated that the restitution fee would be removed. He stated that any disciplinary notation tied to the damage would be corrected. He stated that the use of the police office in this context raised serious concerns and would be referred to district leadership for review. The district attorney objected to some phrasing. The hearing officer did not budge. The resource officer kept his face blank. The assistant principal looked down. Laverne felt her shoulders loosen for the first time in weeks. Not fully. Not enough to trust the district, but enough to breathe. After the hearing, the district moved fast in a way it had not moved for her emails. Within days, she received a letter confirming the fee had been waived and the record corrected. The language was sterile, as if the district were paying for silence with paperwork. But the story did not stay in the room. Another parent filed a complaint after hearing what happened to Miles. Then another. A local advocate asked for referral data. A board member requested a briefing. The district's own emails, now part of a record, became a problem they could not bury with polite phrases. Miles returned to school, and the hallway felt different. The resource officer still walked the corridors. The assistant principal still smiled. The bank of fluorescent lights still hummed. But now, Miles had something he had not had before. Proof. Not the kind of proof that makes you feel safe forever. The world does not work like that. Still, it mattered that the district's own paper had admitted what the adults in the building had tried to pretend was normal. It mattered that his grandmother had forced a hearing officer to look at a child's fear and call it what it was. Weeks later, the district announced updated guidance about device damage referrals. They framed it as a clarification. They said they wanted to ensure procedures were supportive and equitable. They emphasized restorative practices. They mentioned training. They did not mention Miles. They also sent a new shipment of protective cases. Miles kept his head down, for a while anyway. That kind of experience does not evaporate because a letter arrives. It leaves a residue. It makes a boy hesitate before raising his hand. It makes him watch adults more closely than he should have to. But slowly, he began to return to himself. He started answering questions again. He started laughing with friends again, cautiously. He stopped checking over his shoulder every time the resource officer passed. One afternoon, months after the crack first appeared, Miles came home with a permission slip for an academic program. Something small but meaningful. A chance for advanced coursework. A chance to feel like school belonged to him again. Laverne signed it without comment, then made him a plate of food and sat at the table with him while he worked. No celebration, no speeches. Just the steady rhythm of life, rebuilt. The district iPad, repaired and returned, sat in its new case. Protected now, finally, after all the damage had already been done. Laverne looked at it once in the warm kitchen light and felt the strangest thought pass through her mind. That the crack on the screen had been less dangerous than the crack in the district's mask. The glass could be replaced. The trust, once fractured, did not come with a warranty. Miles finished his homework and closed the folder on the table. He did it carefully, the way he always did. Then he looked up, and for the first time since that day in the police office, his face was open again. Not naive, not fearless, just present. And in that simple moment, Laverne felt the real payoff, the one no letter could provide. The district had tried to scare a boy into paying for their fragile system. Instead, their own emails walked into the hearing and told the truth for him.